almost a decade, Alexander the Great and his army swept across Western Asia and into Egypt, defeating King Darius III and the Persians at the battles of River Granicus, Issus and Gaugamela. Next, despite the objections of the loyal army, who had been with him since leaving Macedonia, he turned his attention southward towards India. It was there in 326 BC that he would achieve what many would consider as his major victory, the Battle of Hydaspes. At Hydaspes, he would meet a formidable opponent in King Porus of Paurava, blocked Alexander's advance, but more importantly his military savvy would be challenged as never before. Alexander commenced his invasion of India through the Khyber Pass. Whilst possessing a much larger army, at the battle, an estimated 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry crossed the river, in time to engage the enemy. By the time of Alexander's arrival, it would be further swollen by the monsoon season, and the melting snow of the Himalayas. The primary Greek column entered the Khyber Pass, but a smaller force under the personal command of Alexander went through the northern route, taking the fortress of Aornos. In early spring of the next year, Alexander formed an alliance with Taxiles, the king of Taxila. They combined their forces against Taxila's neighbor King Porus. Porus believed and hoped Alexander would have to either wait for the monsoon season to end before crossing, or simply abandon his quest and leave. In preparation for the Macedonians' arrival, he stationed his army in a defensive position along the river and waited. Alexander had also arrived at the Hydaspes, well prepared. Before marching into India, he had recruited additional troops from many of the Persian territories he had conquered, training them in the Macedonian style of fighting. Across the river, Porus was also preparing and waiting with his army of elephants, cavalry, infantry and 6-men chariots. Porus believed he had the ultimate advantage. He had only to remain in his defensive position and slaughter Alexander's army as they emerged from the river. Alexander and his army sat across the Hydaspes, facing Porus, each king quite visible to the other. Porus continued to be hopeful that Alexander would simply give up and leave. Porus was unsure whether or not he could defeat the Macedonians. After a long tedious search, a suitable location to cross was found, about 18 miles from the Macedonian camp. It was late evening, and a terrible thunderstorm was raging, but Alexander and his army were ready. In order to keep Porus unaware of his crossing, Alexander left Craterus in camp with a sufficient force, and orders not to cross. He crossed with an estimated 15,000 cavalry, and 11,000 infantry. Unfortunately, the crossing did not go as smoothly as he had hoped. After reaching the shore at dawn, Alexander regrouped his army into battle formation, and prepared for his meeting with Porus. Scouts for Porus had already seen the Macedonians crossing, and informed the Indian king of Alexander's arrival. Porus prepared to retaliate. In an attempt to delay Alexander, Porus sent his son with 3,000 cavalry and 120 chariots. This attempt spelled disaster for Porus. Alexander killed the son and destroyed the cavalry and chariots. Without waiting for the additional infantry to cross, Alexander advanced the 6 miles towards the Indian camp, where he would wait for the remainder of his infantry to arrive. Porus prepared to meet Macedonian army, placing his best weapon, the elephants, on his front line ahead of his infantry. Alexander, stationed on the right, used the companion cavalry to attack Porus' flanks, while his horse archers pelted the elephants with arrows. Next, Porus, who awaited help from his ally, King Abbases of Kashmir, sent his elephants against Macedonian phalanx. Unfortunately for the Indian army, the elephants panicked and revolted, actually causing more harm to Porus' own men than to Alexander. Porus' army fled straight into the waiting Craterus, who had already crossed the river. 12,000 Indians and 80 elephants died to only 1,000 Macedonians. Throughout the battle, King Porus remained on his elephant, despite suffering severe wounds, shocked to see his army flee, but still reluctant to admit defeat and surrender. Alexander approached the proud, defeated king, and asked him how he wanted to be treated, to which Porus responded that he wanted to be treated as a king. Alexander respected this, and told Porus he would remain king, owing allegiance to Alexander, and give him the additional territory of various independent tribes whom he subdued. In 326 BC, the army of Alexander approached the boundaries of the Nanda Empire. His army, exhausted from the continuous campaigning, and concerned at the prospect of facing yet another gigantic Indian army, demanded that they should return to the west.